Today's video is brought to you by Storyblocks. Ready?
Okay, we're rolling.
Okay, and go for it.
We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Why can't you see what you're doing to me when you don't believe a word I'm saying?
When I walk through the streets of alone.
I've always been interested in learning about why people do the things they do, but not at a surface level, instead digging deeper and finding out how these journeys have impacted their lives.
My dream. Oh, yes, I will. There's only one way.
Over the years, I've had the pleasure of creating multiple character-driven projects, and I wanted to talk a little bit about them today, just for anyone who's looking to learn more about the process.
That she wear. I just gotta keep looking.
So in this video today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some examples from a few projects and just do a little bit of a breakdown in hopes that this helps anyone who's interested in this type of work or who's kind of in the middle of a project, just give you some ideas, some direction, or something to think about. What we'll do is we'll kind of start with finding a subject, including, what to look for and where to look for subjects. And then also going to kind of dive in a little bit into talking about, figuring out what a central kind of theme or core message is for the film itself. And then obviously, there's a lot to talk about for one episode. So I'm going to do a follow-up where I do a little bit of a breakdown when it comes to structuring a story, just for kind of the best flow and the most impact. And, obviously just want to say as well, this is my approach just after doing this type of work for a number of years, but obviously it's not the only approach. So kind of take from it what you will. So personally, I've always been interested in people who have kind of dedicated their life or a portion of their life to some sort of specific project or journey or goal or craft, something like that. And, it's really important as well to note that you don't necessarily need to be interested in the thing that they do. It's more so used as kind of a vehicle to tell the story through. And we'll, break that down a little bit in the next part. But for now, let's jump into the first example.
Good.
So I'm going to start with a film that I actually haven't finished yet, and this subject's name is Terry. He's from a project that I've titled The Man with the Voice, and this is something that I started last year, and like I said, never got to finish. Right when I started this project is when COVID hit, so I do hope to pick it up at some point in the future, but for now, I figured it'd be a cool way just to get some of it out there and discuss it.
Please, everybody.
So I was trying to find an interesting subject for my next documentary. This was right after I'd wrapped up You Will Survive Doomsday, which I posted on this channel. Some of you may have watched it. But I'd always been kind of interested in doing something about a musician, but I wanted to explore that in a bit of a different way. I wasn't necessarily interested in doing something just about someone writing music. And I don't even know how, but somehow I kind of got into the world of Elvis impersonators after doing a bunch of research, which immediately interested me, and then started kind of digging into that world a bit and ended up coming across Terry, who actually lived not that far from me back in Ontario in Canada. And I will say, I didn't have any interest in Elvis whatsoever, even though I did start to appreciate his music a lot more after doing this project. But it was kind of Terry as a subject and just this world of Elvis impersonators in general that kind of ticked a lot of boxes. So to break that down a little bit, the first thing, this was a subject who had dedicated themselves to a craft for a long period of time, which, like I said before, is really important to me. Second, it was visually interesting and unique. There were a lot of creative possibilities. The third thing is that Terry also lived alone, and I wondered if, maybe there was something to explore there as the conflict in the film. And the fourth thing, and probably most important, is just this kind of idea of living this second life or this second kind of reality as an Elvis impersonator. And I thought, maybe there's some potential there just to make the story about how our passions can, at times help us kind of escape. So next up, I want to talk about Bruce from my documentary, You Will Survive Doomsday. And my friend had actually photographed Bruce a couple years before I made the film. And obviously I was immediately interested when I learned about his story. And there's a lot of potential there. If you haven't seen the film, I'll put a link below. But basically, Bruce constructed his own nuclear fallout shelter, which he built out of 72 school buses, and he buried them, I think, 10 feet underground. So a ton of interest creatively, visually. But Bruce had a lot of coverage done over the years, which is not surprising. News stations, TV shows, articles. He was even on, I think it's Nat Geo's show, Doomsday Preppers. But I saw kind of potential to do something a little bit deeper about the why and, try to avoid sensationalizing, this kind of extreme thing that he'd built. But there were definitely a couple things with Bruce's story as well that stood out right away and that checked a lot of boxes. The first thing is Bruce, like Terry and all the other subjects I've focused on, he dedicated himself to kind of a lifelong endeavor or craft. This was obviously building the shelter. Second, it was visually interesting, a lot of potential both with the fallout shelter and then also just Bruce's environment. But the third thing, and probably most interesting, is just that Bruce had lived such an unconventional life, just this path, his journey of building the shelter. And a lot of people probably judged him in a negative way for it, just thinking he's crazy or something like that. So I felt like there was a lot of potential to make a film about kind of following your own path and just embracing your unique interests, which is something that I feel strongly about. So those are just two examples. Obviously, though, they share a lot of similarities of things that are important when it comes to finding a subject. And that is just finding someone who's dedicated their life to a specific purpose or passion, someone where there's the potential for interesting visuals, interesting environments. And then the third thing is just finding someone where there's kind of a strong message or strong theme to build the film itself around. But before we jump into the second part where we're going to look at finding a theme or a specific message, I just want to take a second to talk about today's sponsor, Storyblocks, which is a complete stock footage solution that works off of a subscription model that gives you unlimited access to footage, sound effects, graphics, and other creative elements. For me, doing filmmaking and also video work here on YouTube, it's really cool just to have a platform that I can jump onto, especially last minute, looking for different elements like sound effects or things like subtle film overlays and flashes that I use in my edits. And their unlimited access plan allows me to not have to worry about paying for each element or tracking how many downloads I have left, which is awesome, and in the end just saves me time and money. So if you're interested in learning more about Storyblocks, you can find a link in the description below. Let's jump back into it. So once you've found your subject, it's time to start shaping the film or the project. And this is where the story starts to take life. But first you need to figure out what the core message or theme is going to be. So I personally think that one of the biggest mistakes people can make when doing a character-driven project is just to focus on kind of the obvious and the apparent. So, let's say you're doing something about an artist. It could be easy to just focus on, say, their process, asking them questions like, how long does it take you to make the art? When did you first start? What are some of the challenges that you faced? How long have you been doing this? Just these really kind of surface level questions that can end up really not being that interesting or exciting. So my thought's always been that, everyone has a deeper story or deeper meaning or journey behind the things that they do. And you can kind of use their platform as a way to share that message or share that story itself. So we'll jump into a couple of my films and I'll just talk a little bit in detail about how I picked out what I was going to focus each one on. So we'll start with Terry again, and like I said before, I was really interested in this idea of just living this kind of second reality or second life, and I thought to myself, is this a way for Terry to escape? When he goes into character, is there anything that he'd want to escape from? These are just some of the initial thoughts going through my head, and when I did the first production day with Terry, I actually sat down and did an interview with him, and I started to learn a little bit more about some struggles he'd been through in his family life years ago, and also just how music played a really big role in kind of helping him get through those tough times. So all of a sudden, I saw a lot of potential with Terry to make a film not about him becoming an Elvis impersonator, but more so about how our passions can kind of be so much more than just an activity that we do. So next up is looking at Bruce again, and obviously when you meet him, the first thing that jumps out at you is the fact that he built this underground nuclear fallout shelter. It's a big deal, and it is included in the film, but I really wanted to kind of dig deeper into that process. And as I did, I learned that Bruce just kind of followed what he thought was most important in life, trying to help preserve humanity or rebuild humanity after a nuclear war. And he did this regardless of what other people thought. After spending some time with Bruce and also really just starting to understand his thought process, it was clear that the main message for the film was to be one about following your own path. And, in my opinion, Bruce and his lifelong dedication to the Ark 2 shelter was just the perfect example of that. So again, the film isn't about the process of building the shelter and how it came to be. It's more so about pursuing something unordinary regardless of judgment from the outside world. And it's important to note that, this just takes time as well, and sometimes it doesn't even work out. You might find a subject and it might not just be what you thought it would. But often what I'll do is I'll go and I'll just spend an initial day with the person, and I'll just do some filming, I'll take some photos, I'll do an interview with them, just sit down, learn more about their background, learn more about their history, see their environment, and then I'll often kind of go home with that, chop up the interview, and just make this kind of really rough layout of where the story could potentially go. And that'll give me something to kind of expand on, brainstorm with, and often it'll really kind of drive a lot of creative ideas when I go back when it comes to shooting style, specific shots, different things I want to do, different parts of the story that I also want to kind of get more of as well. So really important to do. Often just go out for that first day with no expectations, spend a day with your subject, and just kind of see where things go. Okay, so those are just a couple of examples, and obviously they're focused on the filmmaking work I've done, but I really do believe that this applies to character-driven photography projects as well. And this is a way of working that I really enjoy because I think there's so much potential from a story standpoint and from a visual standpoint when you enter into kind of someone's world, into their environment, and just discover all of these things that you really would have never known about otherwise. And, it can lead to you creating something that has a lot of impact or has a lot of meaning behind it. So, like I said, gonna do a follow-up to this, a part 2. I really want to talk about structuring a story after you've found kind of your message, your theme, just what's the best way to tell that from the intro with the opening hook, bringing in conflict, conclusion, all that kind of stuff. So keep an eye out for that in an upcoming episode, but just want to say thank you as always, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you soon.